Now, Xavi will stand down as Barcelona head coach at the end of the season after 2.5 years in charge. He announced his decision after Barca lost 5-3 to Villarreal. Let's get some reaction from Spanish football expert Terry Gibson. Very good morning to you, Terry. What sort of decision is this in terms of how much surprise and shock it's caused over in Spain, would you say?
I don't think it's a massive shock. I think it's a shock that it happened last night. I think there's an element of maybe Xavi has beaten Barcelona to the punch because their recent form has been particularly poor. They've lost big games by big scorelines. So there was a huge pressure on Xavi, and there were calls from some of the supporters due to their poor recent run of form that Xavi might lose his job. So it's interesting how he's approached it, coming after a typical defeat last night against Villarreal, where we saw them go 2 goals down. They come back to lead 3-2, then lose 5-3 at home against Villarreal, who are really struggling this season. Up until last night's game, you talked about Villarreal as possibly relegation candidates this season. So it tells you what a surprise the result was last night. And it typifies the performances that we've seen from Barcelona recently under Xavi. What I'm talking about is everything is so untidy. Team selection is scattergun. You never know who's going to be playing at the back. You never going to know who's going to be playing up front. So it's all become really untidy. So the question now is, does Xavi last until the end of the season? Or will they decide after the stand that he took last night that it may be better to change pretty soon as opposed to waiting until the end of the season?
To pick up on 2 words that you used there, Terry, untidy and scattergun. I think back to last season, Barcelona barely conceded a goal. They've conceded 9 in a week. Is that because, as you said, there is a lack of consistency in selection, or are there tactical issues too?
I think there's 2 big reasons, Robert. I think Marc-Andre Ter Stegen has been missing for about 3 months now. So Iñaki Peña has been the replacement. He's been okay, but he's not a replacement. He's nowhere near the level of Marc-Andre Ter Stegen. I think a settled centre-back pairing hasn't been properly available to Xavi this season through injuries. And, of course, a player that served them so well for probably about 15 seasons has gone, and that's Sergio Busquets. So you're looking at who's going to take his place as a holding midfield player, and no one has really stepped up to that challenge. No one really fancies that job, to be honest, and I don't blame them if you're taking over from an icon that served the club so well. Possibly one of the best players ever to play in that position. Frankie de Jong hasn't fancied doing it. Gundogan hasn't fancied doing it. And Oriol Romeo probably wasn't the right replacement for Busquets. So I think there are reasons why. But it's 29 goals conceded. They only conceded 20 last season. It was quite an unusual season for Barcelona to win the league in the style that they did, based on a sound defence and a goalkeeper having the season of his life. So this season, I didn't expect it to be so tight defensively, but recently it's become really slack. Horrible habit of conceding early goals as well as cost them over the season. And you just keep thinking, are they going to learn their lesson, which Xavi's saying to them before the game? They start with a lackadaisical approach, find themselves behind on a number of occasions, show good spirit, plenty of times to come back and get the victories. But just recently, that hasn't been the case. So it's a tough period for Barcelona, and it's been a tough period for Xavi. We all know the trials and tribulations that go on at that football club, particularly the last couple of seasons. And Xavi, by and large, has served them well. And I think it makes you realise now what an outstanding success it was last season in those circumstances to win La Liga and to win it by 10 points over Real Madrid.
Yeah, to what extent those trials and tribulations that you just touched on, we all sort of know what's going on off the field, the refinancing that's being done to make signings. To what extent could Xavi use that as a bit of mitigation, and to what extent would that be fair if he did so?
I think it would be fair if he did so. I think there are players that he would love to have joined Barcelona, but they weren't able to afford them. He's probably had players put into the club that he probably wasn't too keen on as well. And maybe João Felix falls into that category, who's not been a starter of late. I think you can look at some of the signings they've made that have, I wouldn't go as far as to say let him down, but probably expected better, and Robert Lewandowski is one of those. But he had a good season last year, but halfway through last season, he started off like a house on fire. Halfway through last season, his form tailed off. This season, it's been a drastic decline in the form of Robert Lewandowski. So that's made it difficult for Xavi to rely on the senior players, because what Xavi has done is been willing to unleash a load of young players into Barcelona. So I think the future is particularly bright for Barcelona. You know, the amount of teenagers that are playing, maybe too many at the moment. But Xavi has had options to play older players, but decided to play 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. I think Pedri is the veteran of the young group, and he's 21. Gavi's 19. Balde is 19. We had Pau Kubasi last week, played at 16. Lamine Yamal is 16. Should these players be playing for a typical Barcelona team that are looking to win La Liga and the Champions League? Probably not yet, but they are certainly not letting him down. So I think any manager that comes in the future will look at these young players, and I think Barcelona have to get the right manager because they are a special group of young players.
We'll get on to who might replace him in just a moment, but interestingly, he described the job, Xavi, as cruel and unpleasant. And days after we saw Jurgen Klopp over in England say that he's leaving Liverpool and he's running out of energy, is there something in Xavi as well that these huge football clubs like Liverpool and Barcelona, the amount it takes out of you on a day-to-day basis to be the manager of places like that?
It certainly does, Robert. And I think Xavi, there was a clip I saw around social media last night where Johan Cruyff was talking to a young Xavi as a player and telling him then what a horrible job it was to be manager of Barcelona. It was a privilege and he was proud to do it, but it wasn't a job to enjoy. And I think the pressure comes with these massive clubs. You talked about a few there. And you could add Real Madrid to that collection as well, where the pressure in Spain, the pressure is such there are about 13, 14 pages in the newspaper, in the print, every single day about Barcelona Football Club. And with the trials and tribulations and the mess that the club has found itself in, that must really take a toll on a manager. And Xavi this season, he got Barcelona through to the Champions League. They faced Napoli in the knockout stages. That was a big plus for Xavi because the 2 seasons before, they hadn't done that. So I think every day brings pressure, and I think, you know, it does take its toll. We saw Pep Guardiola had to have a year off when he left Barcelona Football Club. It's just managing those juggernaut football clubs around Europe that it does take its toll. So Jurgen Klopp, to do the amount of time he's done at Liverpool is exceptional. But those days of Sir Alex Ferguson managing for over 20-odd years are not going to be there in the future, I don't think.
Yeah, and it was interesting, actually, because I think maybe a few people have put 2 and 2 together and made 5 in terms of linking Jurgen Klopp to that job. I have to say, I don't think he is a man who would seem to go back on what he said on Friday of, I want a year off and I need a break. Who do you see as the main contenders for the job?
Well, that's a really difficult one. I think that one of the reasons for Xavi doing what he did last night is he feels he's been undermined slightly at the club by Deco, the sporting director, who seems to favour the B team coach, Rafa Marquez, another former Barcelona player, a teammate of both of those as well. And there has been a hint for some time that if Xavi was to lose his job, Rafa Marquez would take his place. And that seems to be the candidate that's being put forward now as, you know, whether Barcelona stay with Xavi till the end of the season, whether they make the change now, Rafa Marquez seems to be in pole position. So he was an elegant footballer. He knows the Barcelona way. He's running the B team. He knows the young players. That would be an obvious solution. But there's no doubt Joan Laporta, the president of Barcelona, has always adored Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp would be a good fit, as I talked about earlier, about the exceptional group of young, talented players. They need to find an identity. They need to find a style again, Barcelona, which is recognisable from the successful teams we've seen in the past, which is high pressing and you know, high octane football that Jurgen Klopp likes to play. But I agree with you, Rob. I think once he's made this decision, Jurgen Klopp, I don't see him coming back and managing the team next season. So Barcelona might have to be patient on that one, but he would be the ideal candidate at some stage if he wants to continue to be manager of Barcelona. It's one of the giant clubs in European football, despite the circumstances they find themselves in. So if he's refreshed after a season off, then it might be something that happens at that stage. But I agree with you. I don't think he'll go back on his word about having a year off and putting his feet up and rejuvenating himself again.
Just one other final name that's been mentioned again. This would seem very unlikely as well. Someone who's been in Barcelona recently, Jose Mourinho. Surely not.
Well, it's typical, isn't it? Jose Mourinho loses his job at Roma and turns up at Barcelona airport the day after. I had no idea why he was there. But I think it's a job that he has had links to the club in the past, but I think he burnt all those bridges when he was manager of Real Madrid. And the incidents that happened between him and Pep Guardiola and one or two other people at the club, it's his stance that he took. He went to war with Barcelona for those years when he was at Real Madrid. He had to. I mean, Barcelona were an incredible football team, one of the best teams ever. But he did manage to win a league title. But when he went to war with Barcelona, I think that finished any chance of him getting the job at that football club. I think he would be a little bit too high maintenance for Barcelona in their present predicament in terms of not being having the money that they had in the past and spending on players. But who knows? Things have happened in football.
Jose Mourinho, high maintenance, surely not. Terry, great to speak to you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your Sunday.